emotional support at hospice. And people used to say to me, wow, that must be such a difficult job. But in actuality, it was the first job that completely fed my soul because of the people that I got to support. And one particular couple that I supported, their names were Susan and Eli. Susan was a woman in her 60s. She had terminal cancer, and her husband was Eli. And I got to know them over the weeks, and we had a lot of laughs and a lot of tears. Eli had a great sense of humor, so we really enjoyed each other's company. But as the impending end of Susan's physical life here drew closer, Eli was finding it really difficult to manage his emotions, and it came out in anger and frustration. So there was a lot of incidences with staff that were alarming. They had called the police one time, and the police came and told Eli that he had to leave and could come back if he was calm. So he came back the next day, he was calm, he apologized, said, sorry, please let me be with my wife. So Susan passes a few days later, and when Eli had come back after the police incident, they had hired a plainclothes security guard who just sat inconspicuously and texted and watched some TV. So there was no incidences while in those last few days. So after Susan passes, they're thinking, okay, well, Eli will leave now, so they're going to let the security guard go. So on the first day when Susan passed, Eli just stayed in the room with Susan's body. And that day came and went. And then a second day came and went. And on the third day, staff was really alarmed, and they had to have a very difficult conversation with Eli about what was actually going to be physically happening to Susan's body soon. So he made the heartbreaking decision to let them come and get her body. He really didn't have a choice. So after arrangements are made and the funeral home is going to be coming to get Susan's body, our nurse brings a quilt to Eli and says, we would like to lay this quilt on Susan when we escort her down to the funeral vehicle. And Eli was looking at it thinking, oh, actually that's really beautiful. And then horror came over his face, and he says to the nurse, has this been on other dead bodies? And the nurse, she was really afraid and said, well, yes, it's the quilt that we use for all our clients who have passed. And he rips the quilt out of her hands, and he rolls it up into a ball, and he throws it at her. And he said he's never been more offended and disrespected at the thought of something like that. So the nurse takes the quilt and she backs out of the conversation, physically and verbally. And I have a presence about me. I have an energy that protects me physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. So I wasn't afraid of Eli, and I stood before him, and I had the longest non-verbal conversation that I think I've ever had with an individual. I looked into his face, I looked into his very big brown eyes, and he was wide-eyed, and tears started welling, and I said to him, Not the things that I'm sure that he had already heard, probably from the other staff encounters of, you can't treat us like this, you can't disrespect us like this, we're only here to help you, we understand that you're hurting. Instead, the things that I said non-verbally were, I know this pain, I have experienced this loss, I understand that your life is shattered, and I'm here to support you. And Eli's response to that in this nonverbal conversation was, I'm terrified. I don't know how to do this. This isn't me. I'm sorry. And then he buckled and he had to support himself against the wall, and he was facing the wall, and he's crying and he's shaking and he's gasping for air. And I approached him and I put my hand on his shoulder and I kept it there until he stopped shaking, until he started breathing normally again. And then he turned his head and he just nodded to me. And I looked into his face and I nodded back. So later that day, the funeral home comes and they take Susan's body away. And again, we thought that Eli would leave now, but he spent a few hours in their room that they had spent many weeks. And when he finally decides to leave, he comes to my office and he says to me, thank you for being so nice to me. I didn't deserve it. And I said, well, I didn't feel that way. Thank you for letting me be there. He asks if I can do him a favor. I said, most definitely. And he gives me a little sachet of sage and he says, could you sage the room for me? And I'm of Indigenous ancestry, but I wasn't raised in my community. I've never saged before. And my internal conversation, I'm like, oh, I don't know how to sage. But in that same conversation, I said, this is an incredible opportunity to learn, as I'm always learning. So the words that I spoke were, I would be so honored to do that for you, Eli, and for Susan. And thank you for trusting me. And then